At my birthday party, my husband attended with the young love he admired, the white moonlight. He gently stroked her belly and asked me, "She's pregnant, what should we do, dear?" No one in the entire room spoke up for me, nor were they afraid of my outburst. I stood up calmly and said, "Congratulations." Congratulations to him for getting what he wished for, and congratulations to myself as well. I have long been tired of loving him. An hour had passed since the birthday banquet began. The dishes had gone cold, and even the waitstaff had asked several times if the cake was ready. I sat in the main seat, staring intently at the chat history between Xander and me. It still lingered on the last message I sent this morning, "Can you come to my birthday?" My parents were sitting on my right side, their faces showing a hint of anger. Xander's mother was sitting on my left, still smiling warmly. It was almost time, so I called him to say I was on my way. He hasn't shown up for almost half a month. 2 months ago, it was he who told me the news about Pearl returning to her country. He took a photo of her walking out of the airport and handed it to me. Just like back then, it made my heart ache with longing. Time has truly treated her well. The frivolity in the gaze and the double entendre in the words made my palms feel icy in an instant. Regarding the matter of marrying me, he has not had a day without feeling unsettled. Suddenly, the door was pushed open forcefully, and Xander walked in holding Pearl. My dad suddenly stood up, his eyes wide open. My mom was gripping him tightly, but honestly, she didn't need to. My dad hesitated and asked, "Xander, what is this?" Xander smiled, pulled out a chair near the door for Pearl to sit down. Then he sat down next to her, one hand resting on the back of her chair. "Dad, didn't Sophia mention it to you? There was a girl I liked back then." My heart felt like it had been punched hard, aching so much that my breath was hissing. Xander's mother had a stern expression. "There's a time for mischief, today is Sophia's birthday." Xander's smile widened as his hand rested on Pearl's abdomen. "Isn't today the perfect day with everyone gathered? Let's make things clear." His gaze turned to me. "She is pregnant, what do you think we should do, dear?" Pearl had been blushing and keeping her head down in silence since she entered. The hands I hid under the table have already drawn blood, but my face remains neither happy nor sad. Xander simply leaned back completely in the chair, lazily staring at me. "You know what to do, right?" My dad slumped into the chair, unable to say a word. Everyone at the table was looking at me, waiting for my reaction. Not even a word of sympathy for me. I couldn't help but lower my head and laugh. "Congratulations." Xander glanced at the table full of dishes, frowned, and snapped his fingers to call the waiter. "Add a few lighter dishes, and also bring a clay pot congee." He glanced at Pearl. She was suffering from morning sickness, and I had to worry about everything she ate. The smile on her lips and the tenderness in her eyes felt like a scorching iron burning me. Pearl seemed a bit uneasy, frowning at the food Xander brought to her lips. Xander's mother remained silent for a long time before getting up. "Xander, you come out first." Xander suppressed his smile and put down his chopsticks. "Just say it here." He looked around and his gaze landed on me. Like a thorn in my back, my hand, which I had placed under the table, unconsciously gripped my thigh. "Mom, are you worried that Sophia will make things difficult for me? That can't be the case, right?" My parents remained silent, just looking at me with a bit of heartache. I know Xander has waited too long for this day, for me to give him his freedom. In our 5 years of marriage, he has shown his disdain for me too many times. I quickly lowered my head, afraid that the tears about to spill would be seen by him. "No, don't worry, I can sign at any time." The proposal to celebrate my birthday came from Xander's mother, perhaps thinking it could mend our marital relationship. Little did she know it only made things worse. Xander's mom sighed and patted my back. "Sophia, don't be impulsive." But that hand couldn't soothe my sadness and embarrassment. Xander was so eager that he took out the divorce agreement and walked over to place it in front of me. He grabbed one of my hands and shoved a pen into it, but his movement faltered. There were still faint traces of blood on the swollen, broken skin of my hand. He frowned slightly and avoided my gaze. "Sign it." That sentence was so soft that only he and I could hear it. He said, "Let me go, and let yourself go too." The summer of my high school year, I nearly drowned, and the passing police officer lost his life trying to save me. In the morning hall, I saw Xander, his face pale as death. My mom held Xander's mom and cried uncontrollably, saying that from now on we would be one family. Later, we truly lived like a family. On those deep nights when Xander's mom hid in the room crying, I would quietly hold her and sleep with her, hugging a pillow. She was very kind to me, trembling as she stroked my head. Xander was transferred to an elite school by my dad, and we attend the same school. He becomes more and more silent each day, while I act like his follower, almost like a nanny. Even when he looks at me with hostility, I grit my teeth and try to be good to him. In his senior year, he became rebellious, often skipping class to smoke on the rooftop. I sneaked up to find him kissing a girl. My face flushed and my heart raced, wanting to escape, but he called me back with a sneer. "Didn't you see it all?" He pulled the girl over and pointed at me, "Meet my future wife." He was full of sarcasm towards me. "My family is wealthy, and my mom loves it to bits." I was so embarrassed that even my toes were digging into the ground, yet I couldn't just turn around and leave. That night, he pushed the door open, leaned against the wall, and looked down at me from above. "I really don't want to transfer schools at all, do you know why?" He said the girl he likes is named Pearl, and he planned to confess his feelings after graduation. But my dad died, and now I can't do anything according to my wishes. The hatred in his eyes later became my nightmare. I secretly went to see Pearl. The girl in her school uniform smiled, her dimples shallow. I quickly signed my name, feeling as if a layer of dust had been wiped away from my heart. Xander snatched the paper away and didn't look at me again. He pulled Pearl out. "See you in a month." And the voice in my heart grew clearer, "The last meeting of this lifetime." The door was slammed shut and then pushed open by the waiter after a long while. "Are the extra dishes going to be served now?" No one answered him. My mom seemed to have been holding it in for a long time and cried out loud. My dad patted her back gently, softly comforting her. Xander's mother sat there in a daze, as if she had not yet reacted to everything before her. As the person involved, I feel like a transparent person. I slowly stood up. "No need to continue, let's settle the bill." Mechanically swiping the card, I returned to the private room and put on my coat, even my fingers were numb. "Are you calm?" "No, I just feel too numb." I walked out, went down to the parking lot, and got into the car. My eyes are still burning, but I have forcefully held back my tears. What is there to cry about? I had long anticipated that there would come a day like this between him and me. Ever since he inexplicably proposed to me with flowers on the day of my college graduation. Then he pulled me along without saying a word when he started to go get the certificate. He walked quickly, even though everyone behind him advised him not to be so hasty. The wedding needs to be prepared, guests need to be invited, and I must have a decent wedding dress. Yet he only hurriedly threw out a sentence, "I'm afraid I will regret it if I wait any longer." At that time, I also mechanically signed my name, and when I walked out, I was still in a daze. The next moment, his words brought me back to reality. He said, "Pearl has gone abroad, are you satisfied now?" The hatred in his words cuts into my heart like 1,000 blades, and I know he hates me. After we got married, he didn't want to touch me at all. Every time I blushed and reached out to him, he would jump back as if he had been electrocuted. "I married you, what more do you want?" So, after a few years of marriage, every time Xander's mom tentatively asked me if there was any news, I never knew how to respond. Gradually, she no longer liked me. Not once have I sighed in front of others, "Our family is going to die out." Now, both she and I can finally breathe a sigh of relief. I quickly packed my luggage and got up to go to the airport. The destination was chosen at random, and the sudden freedom left me feeling at a loss. Since high school, it seems that my entire life has revolved around Xander. At first, it was guilt, and later, it was heartache. Every time I see him alone on the rooftop, smoking with a dazed look in his eyes as he gazes into the distance. My heart aches. Loving him seems to have become my mission. But he never needed it, and after that, I no longer had to force it. My parents called, their voices urgent and sorrowful. I could only reassure them, I want to be alone for a while, I'm really fine. As I sat in the cabin and turned off my phone, I saw a message from Xander. My stomach couldn't wait, I had to take wedding photos with her first. I couldn't help but chuckle, why bother telling me such a thing? Are you trying to remind me that marrying him for 5 years wasn't worth him preparing a wedding? He may not be able to hear it, my words of congratulations. It's not just congratulating him, but also congratulating myself. I can finally stop loving him is truly exhausting. After more than 10 years, I have exhausted all my guilt towards him. I thought for a moment and replied to him, okay, take a few more sets of photos, I won't go to the wedding. He kept showing that he was typing, but he couldn't send a single word for a long time. The plane is about to take off, I turn off my phone and toss it into my bag. As I close my eyes, my body also begins to relax. There will be no more Xander, and no one will ever remind me again, Sophia, my life wouldn't be like this without you. A few hours later, I landed. The moment I opened my phone, several messages popped up. They were all from Xander. The latest one was just a few seconds ago. Sophia, it's 12 o'clock, aren't you coming home? I said the curfew is at 10 o'clock. I was stunned, is there still a curfew after the divorce? The access control was set by him. After getting married, Xander and I lived not far from my parents. Occasionally, I would have dinner and chat at my parents' house, and when I looked up, it was already past 12. Xander doesn't call, but when I get home, the living room is dark. Only the sparks from the smoke at his fingertips are glowing. You still know how to come back? You're married, don't you understand what that means? I explained it at my parents' house, and he just snorted coldly a couple of times. After that, the curfew is at 10 o'clock. Don't come back late. Since then, I've been returning home on time, sometimes rushing back just in time. My parents think our relationship is great, smiling from ear to ear. We're adults now, and there's still a curfew. We never had this rule when you were a child. Now I stand at the airport, looking at this access message with mixed feelings. My finger hovers over the reply box, but I can't type a single word. It's like having devoured a big meal only to realize it was unsalted. He has sent another message, we agreed on this, didn't we? The taxi we agreed on was parked by the roadside. After thinking for a moment, I replied, we are no longer us. I opened the car door and sat inside, he had already made the call. I didn't answer, and he persistently kept calling. As soon as the call connected, his voice came through urgently. Sophia, where are you? The driver in the front row turned back to ask me, we're going to that hotel, right? I nodded, and suddenly Xander on the other end of the microphone exploded. Why the hell aren't you going home at this hour and instead going to a hotel? Who is that man? The sound was so loud that I instinctively pulled back. I instinctively wanted to hand my phone to the driver to explain, but froze the moment my hand reached out. What else is there to explain? A few hours ago, I signed the divorce papers with him. From now on, the sky is high and the sea is wide, I no longer have to worry about deciphering the meaning of his frown. I have never been so calm and justified in replying to him. Xander, I no longer need to report to you. In the moment I hung up, I felt a sense of relief. It turns out I can also hang up on his calls whenever I'm feeling down. Including blocking him. The coastal city has humid air, but I, who grew up in the north, am not used to it. That sticky feeling is hard to say I dislike, it's even a new experience. I wander aimlessly every day, strolling through one street after another. I see a coffee shop with a sign recruiting baristas and casually push the door open. After coming out a little over 10 minutes later, I was still excited about my momentary impulse. I had obtained my barista certification a long time ago, but had nowhere to use it. My parents are well off, but all my thoughts are focused on Xander. They often feel indebted to him, and I am even more afraid that I don't take care of him enough. More than 10 years of caution and restraint have only resulted in one humiliation after another. Xander once hoped to follow in his father's footsteps and become a police officer. But Xander's mother couldn't help but wipe her tears and pat his back. "Do you want me to send a white-haired person to bury a black-haired one?" Later, he studied finance in college and graduated smoothly to start his job. My dad almost used all his connections for his performance. But every time Xander comes back from socializing, he stares at me coldly with a fixed gaze. "Your family knows how to make me feel small." He asked me more than once, "Sophia, do you owe me, or do I owe you?" In this tangled questioning, I knew he was unwilling to love me. He won't love me either. But just like the access control, just like how he is now persistently calling me from a strange number. Not loving me, but not letting go either. What's the point? When I went to work at the cafe, I kept thinking while I was frothing milk. To him, I was probably just the milk foam that accidentally dripped onto the espresso. Everything lost is blamed on this drop, even if it was just by chance. I've come to understand, and I've let go, freeing myself. Pearl seemed like a guillotine hanging over my heart. I was always afraid of when it would fall, but now everything has settled. From the moment they appeared embracing, I no longer loved him. The 30-day cooling-off period passed quickly, and I booked a flight back. Just as I walked out of the airport, a hand suddenly grabbed my arm. The suitcase in my hand was taken away, and I nearly fell over. "Xander pulled me outside without looking back. I thought you weren't coming back." How could that be? I counted the days waiting for this moment, more eagerly than I once waited for his approval. I tried to pull my hand back, but found that he tightened his grip even more. Once I could endure, but now I cannot. "It hurts, let go." He abruptly stopped in his tracks, his hand weakly releasing. I rubbed my wrist and walked forward. "Don't worry, I won't go back on my word." When I reached the car, he hurried a few steps to open the passenger door. I was stunned, reached out to open the back door, and sat down. He stood for a long time, then suddenly slammed the door shut and sat back in the front seat. The car started, and he still wore a look of indifference. "Sophia, do you really need to be so deliberate? If you're upset, why not say something?" I couldn't understand why he suddenly became aggressive, so I pondered for a moment before slowly replying to him. "Some girls mind if others sit in the passenger seat. I don't want Pearl to misunderstand you." He still relentlessly questioned me. "Why did you block me? I called so many times, why didn't you answer?" I think he, like me, has unconsciously developed habits over these years. Habitually questioning me, habitually demanding my unconditional cooperation. But I have already completed his transformation in this month. Even under such questioning, what I feel is not panic, but anger. "I don't want to answer, your constant calls are really annoying me. Is this reason sufficient?" His sudden slam of the brakes nearly sent me crashing into the back of the seat. I looked at him in shock as he turned his head, his expression so angry it seemed like he could tear me apart at any moment. "Annoyed? Sophia, who do you think my dad died because of? Do you think I'm annoying?" The moments that exhausted me during my life with him are all coming back. One after another, they are all his questions and mockery. But at this moment, not a single ripple stirred in my heart. It was so calm that it seemed he no longer deserved any further explanation from me. After driving and getting the license, you and I would have no relationship at all. He slammed the steering wheel fiercely, producing a piercing honk. After starting the car again, it seemed like it took him a long time to calm down. He asked me where I had been this past month. Then, almost casually, he said, "Aren't you eating? You've lost so much weight." I don't want to answer his questions. From now on, I don't need to share anything with him anymore. I can only change the subject. "Have you and Pearl taken your wedding photos? If you haven't found a suitable photographer, I can recommend one for you." I think he wants to ask me how I went to the seaside. Ever since I nearly drowned in high school, I have been afraid to go near the water. Even if my parents suggest a family trip together, I would avoid all water activities. That kind of near-death fear constantly looms over me like a nightmare. But this time I made the biggest attempt in that seaside city. I walked along the shallow beach the entire afternoon and overcame the fear in my heart to swim a couple of times. When I came ashore, my heart was racing, yet I felt a joy of rebirth. It was as if in that moment immersed in water, I had completely let go of my worries. Xander's sarcasm brought me back to my senses. What else? Are you planning to help us book the wedding banquet and find a good maternity center? He had arrived at the place, stopped the car, and walked over to open the door. Without saying a word, he pulled me down. Sophia, what are you trying to do this time? Trying to act magnanimous to make me feel guilty? His voice and actions filled me with a deep sense of weariness. I resisted his touch, both physically and emotionally. I fiercely shook off his hand and jumped out of the car myself. What tricks do I have? Right now, I just want to hurry up and get a divorce and never have anything to do with you again. Are you satisfied? Xander, I have repaid what I owed you. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, staring intensely. Pay it back? What do you have to pay it back with? Can you even pay it back? I couldn't help but grow cold in my expression, my steps ascending the stairs without a hint of hesitation. Let's end this, let it all come to a swift conclusion. Xander rushed up and tightly grabbed my wrist. You speak. I gritted my teeth and fiercely walked in. His hand was gripping my wrist, but it seemed to have lost the strength it had just moments ago. As we neared the door, he forcefully pressed me against the wall. You still haven't told me, who is the man you've been with this past month? I almost forgot about it, and it took me a while to remember as my mind went blank. The taxi driver picked me up from the flight and took me to the hotel. He seemed to relax a bit, and the hands he had on my shoulders also loosened. I laughed in anger. No, we're getting a divorce. Don't you think it's ridiculous to ask that? Or is it that only you can have children with someone else while we're married, and I can't? Perhaps it struck a nerve, and he suddenly withdrew his hand. His gaze darkened as he stared at me. What right do you have? Enough. I've had enough of this constant questioning and belittling from him. I distanced myself a bit and straightened out my wrinkled clothes. When I looked up at him, my gaze was indifferent. You can scold me for being ungrateful, but I no longer owe you anything. Xander, for the past 10 years, I have been heartbroken for you every moment. I loved you as much as I could, but now, my feelings for you have run dry. I no longer fear that he doesn't love me. Nor do I feel indebted anymore. I walked in. I no longer care who you love, anyone is fine, as long as it's not me. We arrived and got the certificate, and Xander had a dark expression the whole time. I even started walking more lightly, answering my mom's call as I walked out. I've received it, nothing much, I'm going home to eat. Xander's voice came softly from behind me. Why are you so happy that it has nothing to do with me? I stopped in my tracks, surprised that my happiness had become so apparent. But I didn't turn back and continued to walk straight ahead. I have never felt the wind so gentle, even the cars stuck in the morning rush hour seemed like sloths, a bit adorable. I only took 2 days off. At the dinner table, my mom kept serving me food. My dad looks like he hasn't seen me in years. He's thinner and darker. Between the lines, there's both concern and unspoken words. Knowing that I work in a cafe, my mom stopped what she was doing. If you like it, I can open one for you here, consider it a hobby. I interrupted her. Mom, I'm doing well over there. She fell silent, lowering her head to wipe away her tears. Actually, I didn't intend to stray too far from home, but this brief freedom exhilarates me. In a place where I won't have to worry about running into Xander around the corner. It seems that I can only find myself. I talked endlessly to them about my experiences over the past month. When I got excited, I couldn't stop laughing. My dad suddenly said softly, I haven't seen you smile like that in a long time. How long has it been? I can't even remember myself, smiling awkwardly, not daring to cry. Your mother-in-law. Xander's mom has moved back. My mom hurriedly changed her mind and said she wouldn't live in the house my parents bought anymore. Not long after I left, she insisted on moving back to her old place. Do you want to go see her? I looked at my parents' hopeful eyes and shook my head. No, don't disturb their life anymore. I was in a hurry at the time and realized there were many things I hadn't brought from home. Put down the chopsticks and tell my parents, please take back your things. I can't do something like kicking him out, nor do I want to see him. Returning to the seaside city, this time I had an extra suitcase. It was filled with my parents' worries. A colleague helped me find an apartment, and I quickly checked out of the hotel and moved in. Besides work hours, I watch movies in my free time and occasionally go to the beach. The water that once terrified me now rolls up to my feet, yet it brings me a sense of peace. The unfamiliar number still calls every day without stopping. Mixed in with the messages, I didn't read a single one and changed my SIM card. I only told my parents, reminding them not to say anything if Xander asks. My mom hesitated, he might just want to care about you. No, Mom, don't disturb him. And don't let him disturb me again. I think he just hasn't adapted to my sudden refusal to obey him. But Pearl will make him adapt. The once white moonlight was able to reunite with him. Even the deepest wounds will be healed, including those youthful sorrows. But half a month later, the door of the cafe was opened. I lowered my head to brew coffee. Welcome. A familiar voice was close at hand. I'm here to report. I looked up in surprise and met Xander's gaze. Water splashed everywhere. I fumbled to wipe it up, and he laughed out loud. It was as if I had seen a ghost. I watched him sitting across the table from the boss, talking confidently. My heart was filled with confusion and panic. It felt as if the hard-won tranquility had been abruptly shattered by someone. I sneaked out to call my parents. Their tone was full of guilt. He comes to ask us every day. A huge question mark continuously rises in my heart. What about Pearl? Why did he leave his pregnant lover and come here? When I returned, he had already changed into his waiter uniform. There were many college students working part-time in the store, and he seemed out of place. I tried my best to lower my head and avoid his gaze, but I couldn't escape his constant following. After finally enduring until the end of the workday, I changed my clothes and left immediately. Xander chased after me with a suitcase. Where do you live? I stopped in my tracks, and the restlessness that had been building up all day finally erupted. What exactly do you want to do? What about your job? Did you come here just to humiliate me? He had a calm expression. I quit my job to come see you. How easy it sounded. I turned and walked away, and he hurriedly chased after me. I didn't book a hotel, I'll go to your place first. I had to stop again and coldly remind him. Xander, we are divorced, and Pearl needs you. He remained silent, following me closely as I walked. At the crossroads, I had completely lost my patience. What exactly do you want to do? He stared at me with piercing eyes. Are you afraid of me? I shook my head. What am I afraid of? We have nothing to do with each other anymore. Your behavior is really troubling me. I even took out my phone. Do you need me to have Pearl come pick you up? He just looked at me. This is our business. Sophia, are you drawing such a clear line with me because of her? I almost thought I misheard. The one who appeared at my birthday party with the pregnant white moonlight was him. The one who couldn't wait to take wedding photos was him. The one who was afraid I would procrastinate and not get a divorce was also him. Now that I have drawn the line, he still comes to question me. I asked him, what else do you need me to do? He furrowed his brow and lowered his head. I felt as if I were seeing that Xander smoking on the rooftop. Filled with confusion and helplessness. He took a long time to speak. Pearl and I have never slept together. His hand, hanging by his side, slightly clenched into a fist. Sophia, I think I actually like you. Compared to what he said about Pearl, this sentence surprised me even more. I unconsciously took 2 steps back. When he raised his head and reached out his hand to me, I instinctively swatted his hand away. Sophia, you. I said quickly, don't like me, I don't want to be with you at all. His expression was a mix of emotions, and his brow furrowed even more. Are you blaming me? Only love can breed resentment. But what rises in my heart is only panic, the fear of being dragged back into the past. I almost ran away in a panic, hailing a taxi. Xander kept calling me, so I simply turned off my phone. Actually, long before we were in the divorce cooling-off period, I received a friend request from Pearl. I declined, but she persistently kept adding me. After passing, she sent me a voice message. She said, if you let go, I beg you not to look back, can you let him go? She was never the kind of unrequited love, the white moonlight, she loved Xander too. It was just that, coming from an ordinary background, she couldn't resist the temptation. My dad sent her abroad to study, which in her eyes was an irresistible bright path. So she said nothing. But she couldn't forget Xander, who was waiting downstairs at her home the night before she left for abroad. I later met many people, but none of them were him. She said, Sophia, you can't break us apart twice, can you? His dad saved your life. Everyone keeps reminding me, and now even she is reminding me. I calmly agreed to her, even if she hadn't mentioned it, I would have done so anyway. In this lifetime I will never have any intersection with him. I wish you both happiness. What I said came from the heart, yet he now says he likes me. But I no longer need his affection. Xander's mother called me late at night. It felt like it had been half a century, and we were both a bit awkward. She said, Xander went to find you. Did you see him? I hummed in response, and she seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. I couldn't persuade him, ever since you left, he seems like a different person. She said, Xander keeps going to my parents' house to inquire about my whereabouts. Even after being turned away, I wasn't angry. Instead, I intentionally brought me up while having dinner with her. Will Sophia answer your call? Xander's mom said that Xander always asks her to call me on her phone. After discovering that I had blocked her, he sat in the living room all night. Sophia, come back, Xander said he didn't cheat. I didn't respond to her and hung up the phone. What once lay between Xander and me was hatred, was rebellion. Now, the chasm between us is my lack of love. He can no longer bind me. Pearl came after me 2 days later, looking at me with a face full of sadness. You promised me, Sophia. Xander, who rushed over upon hearing the news, pulled her outside with a cold expression. Her eyes were red, and she stubbornly clung to the doorknob, refusing to let go. You said you loved me, Xander, how could you change? Her tears fell in big drops, trembling slightly as she pointed at my hand. She caused your father's death, and because of her, you can't become a police officer. You said you married her out of despair, and now that you are both divorced, why do you still come looking for her? Xander's face fell under her repeated accusations. I became increasingly calm. I had heard her words countless times. At first, I would feel heartbroken and unable to sleep all night. But now, even the slightest ripple of emotion was gone. I turned and walked towards the control panel. At a distance, Xander turned his head to look at me. Pearl, have I said so much that you only remember this? Pearl's face instantly turned pale. Xander continued, I told you, it seems I don't hate her, don't you remember? I said that I couldn't sleep all night after she left, don't you remember? I also said that I realized I actually loved her, but I used the wrong method. He looked at Pearl, how come you don't remember any of what I said? I didn't want to listen any longer and got up to go change my clothes. I asked the store manager for leave and went out to the seaside. The wind blew in through the car window along the way, as if it had also blown away his words. I made a phone call to Xander's mom. Aunt, take Xander back, I don't want to see him. She was silent for a long time, crying a bit suppressed. I paused. I don't owe him anything anymore, Aunt. It was at this time that my parents realized that those 5 years were actually a sexless marriage. My mom called, why didn't you say anything? I smiled and said, it's all in the past, let's not mention him anymore, okay? I took 3 days off, either sleeping or sitting by the seaside. The undulating sea surface makes me feel calm, as if I have been healed. I no longer need to feel sorry for my survival. In fact, who else besides Xander has had their life rewritten? When I returned to the store, Xander had already resigned and left. The manager said that his mother had come to find him in person. That day he had a fierce argument with his mother outside, and he even knelt down. These things felt strange and distant to me, like listening to irrelevant gossip. The store manager handed me a handwritten letter. He said to give it to you. I looked at the yellowed envelope and shook my head. Just throw it away, as if I had already seen it. After that day, my life in the cafe returned to calm. With the enthusiastic help of my colleagues, I even learned to dive. When I surfaced to take photos, the beaming smile delighted my parents. My dad sent me a message, I'm really afraid you're planning to settle down there. I didn't let him worry for too long. I quit my job and returned at the end of summer. This time I really opened a cafe. At the intersection not far from my parents' house, it's called Looking at the Sea. Walking into the shop, I saw the photo of the sea that I took, and it's not hard to guess the meaning behind the name. But someone misunderstood it. It has been a year since I last saw Xander. He has cut his hair short, looking fresh and slim. When he walked in, I was chatting with the newly hired barista. He spoke in detail about the hand-brewed coffee, the flavor and layers of the beans used. I listened with great interest, not even noticing when Xander stood by my side. The waiter came over and asked him, "Sir, what would you like to drink?" He cleared his throat lightly and said, "The signature one, Looking at the Sea." I turned my head to look at him, meeting those pitch-black eyes. He seemed to be trying hard to lift the corners of his lips, showing me a smile. But I had already averted my gaze. I continued with the previous topic, and as I became more animated, I couldn't help but laugh. After finishing the barista's artistic creation, I left the counter and prepared to leave. Xander hurriedly got up, knocking over the coffee cup, and brown liquid spilled everywhere. I glanced over and continued to walk outside. This time, he directly stepped over the chair and reached out to grab my wrist. My face turned cold, and my eyes fell on his bony hand. He hastily let go of it slowly. "Why did you come back without telling me?" I noticed that he was still wearing our wedding ring on his ring finger. I bought it after we got married, fearing he wouldn't want to wear it, so I kept it in the drawer. As a result, he really never wore it. As for mine, I took it off and threw it away on the day of the birthday party. He noticed where my gaze landed, and his expression suddenly became desolate. "That one of yours, it's long gone, isn't it?" I nodded. "I threw it away the day we signed." He pressed his lips together, the corners of his eyes drooping. "Sophia, I've always been waiting for you." I smiled at him. "Xander, it's over." His body was tense, his head hanging even lower. "I used to guard our home, thinking you would return sooner or later." He said not long ago, he no longer dared to go back there. Everywhere are memories, and everywhere is torment. He remembers that on the sofa, I lay countless times waiting for him until I fell asleep. He would actually carefully carry me back to the bedroom. There have been many times when I lower my head and can feel your breath. With just that little bit of distance, I could kiss you. But he never got close even once. His head had already lowered to his chest, and his voice was tinged with tears. "I fear that I truly love you, afraid that my hatred for you will disappear." He hurriedly raised his hand to wipe away his tears, but it couldn't keep up with the speed of the tear falling onto the back of his hand. "I blame all my misfortunes on you, as if that could cover up all the chaos in my life. It wasn't until you left that I realized I was no longer the person I used to be." He looked at me eagerly, the pleading and despair in his eyes so close. "Can we be as good as we were before? Let me learn how to love you just once." I shook my head. "No, I no longer love you. For the rest of my life, I just want to be a stranger to you." Xander often comes to the shop and sits for an entire afternoon. The staff is curious if he is a freelancer and quietly asked me. Do you know him? He only orders to look at the sea each time. I smiled and didn't respond, and the staff scratched his head again. However, I didn't make an appointment today because I told him you were going on a date tonight. I didn't correct this beautiful mistake. Although in fact, it was just attending a gathering of their friends with my parents. As the night fell and I was about to leave, Xander stood up and followed me out. He suddenly said, "Pearl is going abroad again." I was looking down at the messages from my parents and didn't pay much attention. She has been pursuing me for a year, but when she had the opportunity to further her studies, she agreed without hesitation. I looked at him in surprise. It's not my father, you can rest assured this time. He shook his head with a wry smile. I know. I just suddenly felt lonely. Those who love me and the ones I love have all abandoned me. I ignored him and just walked towards the parking lot. He gently asked behind me, "What time will you come to the shop tomorrow?" I pretended not to hear. In fact, that was our last meeting, and I didn't have the chance to tell him. The manager I recruited for that cafe has already taken their position. I won't be going there anymore. That night, I accidentally broke a wine glass at the banquet. Liquid spilled everywhere. At the same moment, Xander, leaving the coffee shop, had his heart shattered by a drunken homeless man. He crawled for a long time until he took his last breath. People say that the direction he was climbing towards was the cafe called Looking at the Sea. Clearly, not far in the opposite direction was the clinic.